Well, hello, everybody. We'll still have some others joining in, but not to worry, we will be recording this webinar and sending out a copy through our YouTube channel as soon as the recording is ready to go. So I hope that you can join us for the full hour, but if you need to drop off for any reason, there's no problem at all. This is IAM Online March. This is our first one for the year, so I'm so excited that we're kicking off the series for 2022. If you were looking for where innovation meets experience, the CIO perspective on identity and access management, you are in the right Zoom room, and we're so happy to have you here. Specifically, we have our incredible presenters that you're going to hear from in just a bit. We have Bernie Galachik, sorry, I think I said that right, but if I didn't, my apologies, from the University of Minnesota, and Dave Robinson from Grinnell College. And then, of course, our delightful moderator, Kevin Maroney from Internet 2 and In Common. So without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Kevin to kick us off today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Netta, and thanks for putting the pressure on by saying I'm delightful, setting the bar high, as usual. As Netta has indicated, my name is Kevin Maroney. I'm the Vice President for Trust and Identity and Net Plus Cloud Services here at Internet 2. Been here for longer than I thought I would be. I have the distinct privilege of having a job at Internet 2 that was a bit of my professional hobby when I sat in a seat much like Bernie's and Dave's some years ago. And it's just, I love having an opportunity to pay my mortgage and also think about really impactful but also complicated infrastructure issues on campuses and other places to enable universities, regional networks, et cetera, to get their work done. Getting identity and access management right is a part of that. We have nearly 200 people registered for today's webinar and almost as many job titles. From not quite as many institutions. And the reason I draw that out is that there's a pattern at all of our community events where the perspective on IAM is there are many seats in the Coliseum, if you will. So perspective comes from many different places. You're going to hear from two people with similar jobs, but from very different places today. And I just want to encourage you to ask questions to get your part of the story addressed and your part of the story told as well, because there are so many perspectives at the institution and then among the collection of all the institutions. So today is going to be good because we have Bernie and Dave with us, but it could be great if you all share some of your stories and also some of your concerns about identity and access management. It doesn't matter if you're big or small. This is not one of the issues in IT that's where scale does matter, but scale doesn't change the complexity of the situation. The complexity that many of you at smaller institutions are faced with are very similar, if not the same, that people at larger and organizations at larger institutions have as well. So with that, I'm going to dispense with the rest of my framing here so we can get into hearing Dave and Bernie's story. So Bernie, I'm going to start with you. I've had the pleasure of being on your campus some years ago, but for our attendees who might not have been there, tell us a little bit about University of Minnesota and what's made it a special place for you to work and live.
Thanks, Kevin. So I've been at this university for it'll be 36 years this coming October. So there's something about it, right? Either there's something about it or there's something about me, but it's something about it because, you know, the thing that I like about working at universities, which is probably universally true for all of us, is that I believe that universities in general really improve the human condition, right? I mean, we do that through so many different ways of our mission. And as a major public research university, the University of Minnesota is one of those. Whether it's trying to find cures for cancer, social problems, or water quality, it's all about that. And I really enjoy the seat that I'm in because I get to help solve those problems through the use of information technologies, right? The University of Minnesota campus is in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. The Twin Cities is the 16th largest metropolitan area in the country, you know, with about 3.5 million folks in our area. We have 19 Fortune 500 companies in the Twin Cities. And so it's a pretty vibrant place. And the university is nestled right between what you would consider downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul. And while we're in the middle of the major metropolitan area, the wonderful thing about this campus is that you can tell when you're on it, right? The architecture speaks for itself. And many of our students would say that the people, when you're on campus, and the community really provide a certain amount of uniqueness. And so that's what I would say about being here and about working at the university, Kevin.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bernie. Now, Dave, I've been to Iowa, and I know that Kevin Costner lives there and that it might be heaven, but I've never been to Grinnell. So could you tell us a little bit about Grinnell and what makes Grinnell special?
Well, obviously, the first special thing is that Kevin has never been here. So actually, I just made some notes as Bernie was talking there, and there are some wonderful similarities and some juxtapositions as well. So just for a little bit of background, so Grinnell College is a private undergraduate liberal arts college in Iowa. We have between 1,600 and 1,700 students. And one of the key distinguishing features for us is that we're one of fewer than 10 or so top-ranking US colleges and universities that meet 100% of student financial need. And we do that without student loans or anything. It's purely on grant aid. And we're also test optional admission. At the same time, even though we're small on everything else, we're also a top producer of doctoral recipients and Fulbright scholars per capita. So when you combine those kind of statistics together, it gives you an idea of just kind of the unique place that Grinnell holds and the social justice mission that we maintain here as well and practice. And so I think for me personally, it's that combination and what makes the mission of the college, and exactly as Bernie said, how we get to serve that and see it happening in front of us. And then I'm going to try and copy the format that Bernie used as well to fill in some stats here. So we are a massive city of about 10,000. We are in between Des Moines and Iowa City, or we like to more accurately portray this as we are equally distanced between Los Angeles and New York City. And we are, this from my maybe biased perspective, but I don't think it's that biased, this kind of incredible, diverse international community in the prairie. And it's a fantastic place to be.
Awesome. Thanks for painting that picture, Grinnell. Now I want to make my way out there. So let's stick with you a little bit, Dave. So I do appreciate both of the institutional backgrounds because I think it's actually going to show up a little bit later in the conversation, at least I hope it does. Dave, can you tell us a little bit about the organization that you're leading and how it fits into the university structure? And then after a minute or so of that, turn to Bernie and get an idea of what his org looks like.
Sure. So the IT organization here, we're about 50 or so strong. We're largely centralized. 95+% of the enterprise technology lives within ITS, which is our organization. The main exceptions are kind of pedagogical technology, which lives in our academic side of the house, and assistive technology, which is there as well. The way that we're structured is a fairly traditional vertical kind of reporting structure with enterprise services, business intelligence, network services, information security, service management, and then core services. And we have some kind of horizontal groups and connections within that, but largely it's run in that fairly standard way.
Awesome. Thanks. Bernie, what about your org?
The University of Minnesota in its information technology management function, Kevin, is is what I would call a very highly integrated, but very highly distributed technology environment, as many large R1 institutions are. There are 1,250 technologists within the system. I am a system officer, so everything that I do needs to map to and provide support and services to 5 campuses within the state of Minnesota that are part of the University of Minnesota system. There are 1,250 technologists within the system, 450 of which are in the central IT unit. That kind of distribution, though, might cause people to jump to a conclusion that we're misaligned, and so I need to remind senior leadership at the institution and others that as far as information technologies are concerned, we have centralized those commodity-like services and functions into 23 business services that are comprised of 150 different technology service offerings. So when technologies become scalable, their use is common. We consider centralization and have done quite a bit of that over the years. And so that allows me to also, in a matrixed environment, be able to serve many folks' needs. When Dave mentioned the horizontals, we have lots of horizontals here. And the only area where that is a little bit different is our identity and access management function, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, as we go on.
Excellent, thank you. So the next thing that I want to dive into a little bit, and I'm going to start by very quickly telling you my story, is what I'm hunting for here is how you had your IAM awakening. Right? I mean, I remember practically where I was sitting, and it was a long time ago when I realized, I was like, wow, I've never thought of framing a lot of the problems that engage me around understanding who people are and what they have access to, right? I used to be responsible for high performance computing on a campus, and there used to be, the disruptive flavor of computation of the day was distributed clusters of Unix workstations, right? They were going to displace supercomputer centers and mainframes and all this, right? So there was this rush on campus, and we had deployed some software so you could load balance simulations across them, et cetera. But it turned out that in order to get people to share everything, you had to know who they were, what they had access to and why, and what they wanted to do in the future about it. And it all boiled down to understanding the people and how we were managing the people and how they gained access to that. And from that day, that was like 25 years ago. And that added into my toolkit of problem framing and problem solving, looking at a problem from an identity and an access management issue. I'm just curious, maybe Bernie, what happened to you? Was there it could be a governance issue, it could be a ERP issue, it could be a workforce issue, it could be anything. What was that ignition moment for you?
Kevin, it's interesting because I was first introduced to identity through Frank Gruey, who was at one time sort of the godfather of this space, right? Or one of them anyway.
One of them, absolutely.
Right. But at that time, I understood the importance of identity and the importance of what I would call a central function in enabling that to happen. So we weren't working with multiple identities to access systems within the institution. But my sort of aha moment came when probably about 3 or 4 years ago, when our audit group approached me and essentially told us that a third of their audit findings relate to identity and access management. And that repeatability called for the need to do something different. And so we, along with our auditors, engaged in what we call a collaborative assessment, which is an audit by another name, right? But we together dug into this in the context that we wanted to learn and gain feedback. As all of us in IT, we're always asking for feedback, right? I wanted feedback on our identity and access management systems and where we could improve. And it was that moment and the results of that collaborative effort that really spearheaded all of the activities that we have engaged in our identity and access management program, which is 2 years in or so. It served as the impetus for everything that we're doing right now.
As I put in the chat window, you know, the provisioning and deprovisioning of services is something I certainly found. Like that's what the auditors, my experience, that's what the first thing they see, and then they dig just 1/2 inch layer lower, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, you guys aren't turning off, you know, we're not collecting the keys when they leave, so they can still get into the buildings. And it's certainly something that at Internet 2, when Internet 2 started that tier project of several years ago, the #1 requirement across 50 institutions very intensely discovered was provisioning and deprovisioning, sort of validating your journey, Bernie. Dave, what happened to you? How did you end up here?
Oh, well, how I ended up here. So I just reflecting on that, it wasn't a single awakening. There was many compounded, but when I go kind of back to the beginning, initially my idea of IAM was an account in Active Directory. That's where I started from. And then my real awakenings began with a thinly veiled complaint to InCommon about how unintelligible the marketing materials were. And from which I found myself on a focus group at Educause one year. And it was a slippery slope from there. And you know, what I really came to realize more and more was, you know, exactly as you started to describe, the more you look into IAM, the more ubiquitous it actually is. The more everything is linked back to it or from it or both. And I think it's the way I look at it is that IAM is this box that I opened, and stuff just keeps on coming out at me. And you know, every extra step. You know, my background is in science research, and so I'm used to asking a question, answering it, and then having 20 more questions to answer. And that's exactly what IAM has been for me. And that's kind of what's exciting about it as well, and also why CIOs in particular should be, you know, actively involved in IAM and at the institution. So not just one awakening. Just the other thing that jumped into mind when you said awakening, quite often that's associated with kind of a rush of adrenaline. So, you know, maybe this is more of standing on a precipice and taking a step off, finding it's a ledge, and you're on the edge of another precipice, and that's kind of how it's been.
I love your tagline. I hope we are recording this. That the more you look at it, the more pervasive it seems. If attendees and panelists haven't seen the Netflix documentary Fantastic Fungi, which is about mushrooms, the way you described it, Dave, it's like the more you watch that documentary, it's like, actually, I think mushrooms and ants are taking over the world. I just had never looked at it that way. So I love that metaphor and analog. Pivoting a little bit to workforce, because this is another thing that people, another dynamic or dimension of IAM that people tend to be interested in when we used to be able to get into rooms regularly, and we'll soon be doing again, is how it is that various institutions organize their IAM capabilities. I tend to see one of 5 different places, and arguably a 6th place. It could be in the CISO's role, it could report to the CIO, it could report to enterprise infrastructure, enterprise apps, somewhere else sometimes. And sometimes it's in all of those places, and it's a coordinated function, but it's not a single vertical in and of itself. Bernie, how have you currently organized your IAM team, and how's that working for you?
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. I had previously mentioned that we're a very matrixed organization, right? It's an opportunity to ensure that infrastructure services are provided to all teams that need infrastructure services, and that we don't replicate those functions in different directorates, correct? But I made a conscious decision, along with my senior director colleagues, our leadership team, to put identity and access management as a separate directorate with application developers and infrastructure managers in that directorate, which doesn't mean that they are duplicating. It means that I needed to set aside a separate directorate to focus on identity and access management, where the priorities of those other functions were readily available to them. So as a result of the collaborative assessment that I referenced earlier, and our board of regents continuing monitoring of the progress that we're making in our identity and access management program, I needed to have a separate directorate that was solely focused on all of the work that needed to occur to advance identity and access management at the institution, or to transform it, if you will, from where it was. So we have 21 staff members in that unit, which comprise a number of different roles. And the way that we organize within that unit is sort of to have companion teams that are one team focused on identity and the other one that's focused on access management.
I like that.
And then within those sort of roles, if you will, we do both the operational and the strategically advancing initiatives in that way. And we have adopted a scaled agile framework for advancing initiatives within our organization. So that team aligns with that. And we have work plans, and we make progress on those work plans with that organizational construct that I just described.
Awesome. Thanks, Bernie. And for you IAM Online fans out there, I feel like I'm running a podcast. Bernie's team, and Bernie was part of the team. We did an IAM Online and really dove into the evolution of the IAM function at University of Minnesota. It was a really good session, really well attended. So I recommend looking back into the archives, and if you're further interested in what Bernie's done at the University of Minnesota, you can find about 45 minutes of material there. Dave, how have you built out your IAM function, and how is it changing right now?
So as you probably imagine, we have a different structure, and we don't have a formal IAM team. We look at the IAM roles that we have here. If you think of it from a title perspective, those roles live in two of our main teams: in information security, which is where the risk and program workflow audit functions of IAM live, and then separately, mostly in our network services area, is where the tools and the infrastructure, the provisioning and procurement, those kind of things live for IAM. Now, at the same time, this may well become a theme of IAM everywhere, hashtag IAM everywhere, that, you know, all of the other teams have some function in the IAM process. So if you think of enterprise systems, obviously the systems themselves, the integration, service management, there's workflow and interaction with the users in particular. And then we have more of a governance body within ITS, our system security team, which is made up from representatives in all the different areas. And that's the group that is ultimately tasked with the oversight and guidance of what IAM looks like now and kind of more strategically. I just wanted to touch back again on that vertical horizontal component of how teams are organized. One of the we're in the middle of a strategic review right now, and identifying a way that we could have that horizontal communication, but maintain, for example, the audit function separately. We're looking at a model that we don't have a name for yet, so I'm just calling it pseudo teams. And IAM will most definitely be one of these pseudo teams. So it's a non-hierarchical from a reporting perspective, but the idea that folks who have fingers in the IAM pie have a network and kind of more formal conversation and grouping around IAM. So that's how we're looking at kind of making up for not having that formal team.
So one of the things I love about that last part of your answer, Dave, is that I get asked a lot of questions a lot, but one of them is, take a look at our IAM function and whatnot. Is it right, properly positioned? I'm thinking of moving it to the CISO's function. Is that the right thing to do? And I always give the annoying therapist answer. It depends, and it depends a lot on you and your team, et cetera. The one distinguishing characteristic across the 1,000 organizations that, for example, connect to In Common right now is the degree of intentionality that they're managing the function. It to me, and I don't think to anybody, it doesn't really matter if it's vertical, if it's horizontal, if it's over here, if it's over there. It's, did you have an intent to do that? And are you acting on that intent? And are you aware enough on a consistent enough basis to constantly wonder if that's the right place for it to be? Because another characteristic that I've found is that it moves, right? So there can be periods of horizontal organization, and then there can be periods of consolidation, and it ebbs and flows, like so many things in higher education do that. So I just applaud you both, because in two different ways, you're both demonstrating the importance of intentionality in managing the function. Similarly, the manner by which we solve the problems of IAM, right? We have reference architectures and we have guidance for, how to think about source systems and how to think about things like central person registries and role-based access management and authentication and multi-factor and all those kinds of things. Maybe we'll go back to Bernie on this one. Can you paint a little bit of a picture of both sort of the current state of how it is that you're engaging and connecting the source systems like student information system, HR payroll, ledger, grants management? I mean, there's a lot of systems, right? Development and alumni, right? That all want or need the capabilities of IAM. And then if you could, Bernie, also maybe a little bit longer answer, talk about some of the current day challenges that you're having and that you're having to stretch to meet the needs of one of those business units or academic units.
Kevin, I can't give you some of the nitty gritty technical details, right? But what I can tell you is in the context of the identity and access management program, which we have now been working for the last 2+ years, we rolled out a work plan that was a 3 to 5 year effort, right? And part of that work plan was the big aha moment for me in this collaborative assessment. I mean, the reality was that this cannot be solved by technologists alone. That was the biggest thing that I recognized while we were working through this. And so part of what we're doing now as part of the program is really we've set up governance that brings together folks from those different functions that you just described, right? Alum, student, HR, a whole pile of folks who have a stake in the game. And what we've been trying to do is help them understand the complexities and the challenges that we have and where we need to move. Essentially, one of the greatest challenges that we have at the University of Minnesota, from my perspective, not knee deep in the technical details, but our ability to know, to provide the right access to data to the right person at the right time. And for us to be able to do that, we have to have an incredibly excellent relationship with our human resource functional lead and with our student functional lead, because services now need to be regarded, and they haven't been at the University of Minnesota as much as they need to be, sort of a condition of your enrollment or employment. I mean, back in the days when we used to manage our own infrastructures, we had the capacity and we could make choices about the capacity to perhaps let people continue to use services beyond their enrollment or employment. Hence, technologies for life, for email beyond your enrollment, right? Alum email and things like that. Well, today's world is so different. The landscape is so different. And because we're no longer running a lot of those infrastructures on our own, and we're paying licensing fees for the people that are using these services, the institution can't afford to license, Microsoft products for the entirety of the state of Minnesota, because most of the people in the state of Minnesota are University of Minnesota grads. And so we can't do that. So part of what we've been doing is helping people understand the enormity of the problem, the complexity of the problem, and marshaling the kind of support that we need to be able to change our practices quite a bit. There's been a lot of technical work that has been done as part of this program. Early on during the pandemic, because of the cross-functional nature of the work that needed to be done, the pandemic sort of threw a monkey wrench into that. And we all know what our HR people were doing during the pandemic. They were reacting to employment conditions 6 ways to Sunday, right? And so what we did is we took the latter part of our work plan and flipped it to the beginning and started enabling the foundational technologies and doing the rationalization that we needed to do from an IT perspective to be ready to start implementing once we were able to establish those really good working relationships. And I have to say now that the pandemic is in the state that it's in, and our human resources colleagues have cycles that they can spend on this, we've been making some meaningful progress. And by the end of this calendar year, we should be implementing some of that meaningful progress too.
Some of your the goodness of longevity comes through in your answers. It's clear that you understand how the University of Minnesota works. It's just that I like that. Dave, how is it that you would describe your current current infrastructure, current architecture, and what some of your challenges are right now, this spring semester?
Let's see where to start with that. I think maybe I'll start with some of the challenges, and not the broader challenges, but just some real life, like in this week challenges. And I'm sure they're not going to be new or surprising to most folks who are tuning in. And in fact, Bernie already mentioned one of them. So, in the last 3 days, there are 2 things that we've been looking at. One is requests for granting access early and terminating it later than contract dates for short course faculty. Faculty member is here for 2 weeks. They need to prepare course materials ahead of that, and then they need to submit grades after that. But they're only contracted for 2 weeks. And another one, again, from this week is an old favorite of, how to describe it, as intra-college transfers. So typically staff gets a different position. They disappear off with their laptop and everything else and all their access, and they're doing something completely different and slowly snowballing access and information. So how do you control that? And these are all of these easily articulated, really difficult to solve challenges that are ahead of IAM. And much of the approach that we're taking is in exactly the same line that Bernie described. There's a massive communications part in this. It's also I don't like I can't think of a better phrase. Right sizing is a bit buzzwordy, but it's right sizing the communication and the language so that folks can understand the importance of it. HR is exactly where we've started with those conversations. And so looking at institution-wide systems where identity-related information is stored where it should or shouldn't be, what the operational sources of truth are, should be, shouldn't be. How do you fit in the needs of role-based access or attribute-based access or whatever model that you're pursuing, not as a separate standalone program, but part of an existing program. You know, HR information system, I think, is a perfect example of that. And I think a lot of the progress that we're starting to make now is it's like the silent phase of a fundraising campaign. It's years of work ahead of actually seeing something happen to make sure that when people are having conversations, you're actually in the room. That's where the important stuff begins. And so it's an IAM program, but it's not branded as an IAM program. It's an IAM scope within Name Your Project. And so I think that the best way I could sum up is with another metaphor. Is if you imagine a diver, and we're off the diving board, maybe the first 2 inches of our fingers are in the water, and freeze frame it there. That's where I feel we are.
I love the picture. I also love that you have drawn out, but then a couple of the attendees in the chat window have once again indicated that complexity is not in the hands of the large. Adjunct faculty, visiting faculty, short courses, if you don't have ag extension, things like ag extension, and even if you don't have a hospital, you probably have student health services, right? And I love the idea of quiet phase of a development campaign. That rings true to me too, and I know it probably got triggered Netta a little bit with some of her past work experiences. I want to build a little bit on some of the things you guys just touched on relating to governance. And you might not have an IAM governance function, you know, explicitly standing out there like you might have a data governance function. But when I've heard folks like yourself and institutions like Grinnell in Minnesota talk about governance, it, to me, as in, you know, listening to a lot of conversations, it begins to take on some of the characteristics of data governance. And Dave, you kind of talked about that a little bit, because an identity or a person that you might want to have a historical relationship with might come in from alumni and development, for example, but then all of a sudden, you know, admissions, undergraduate or graduate admissions wants a hold of it. And the manner by which alumni and development might be storing and curating those identities, right? I mean, it can come in from all sorts of different kinds of places. So getting not just governance right, but the sensibility that we all have our hands on the steering wheel, which also means we all have an obligation to serve one another's needs in identity management, also access management. Dave, maybe we'll go back to you on this one. Can you say a little bit more or go into a little bit more depth about how it is you're maintaining that kind of, I guess, IAM awareness? You know, again, I love the fantastic fungi metaphors, that the longer you look at it, the more pervasive you realize that it is. But in your role, you're looking at it for a long time. Your vice president for human resources isn't looking at it the same way you do. So that presents a challenge for you, right? How are you dealing with some of these dynamics within the institution?
I guess the first thing from the governance perspective, it's not coincidence that the same bodies are addressing the data governance and the IAM governance questions. They for the same reason of all this big overlap in other areas. I think how we're dealing with it with, for example, VP of Human Resources is the example that you showed. It again goes down to language, I think, and the providing the context without the techie definitions and words. I'm not going to go into an HR meeting and start talking about SAML and shibboleth. You know, I might as well just keep walking and head out the window. But I am going to talk about how easy it is to track the things that HR are interested in doing, and making sure that there's compliance in the various areas that they have to be compliant, and that we can show that, yes, if you have this required training, here's how to know whether that person's done it, and here's how we can automate that onboarding process because we know where they're going to be. And so it's very much presenting, or back to what traditional CIO role was before cybersecurity took over the universe. And that is understanding that business function and being able to present back to your colleagues, yes, this is what it means and how it can be done. Let's work together to find the answer.
Thanks, Dave. Hey, Bernie, how about you?
Kevin, the governance that we have specifically stood up for identity and access management, in addition to the attention that we're getting from our Board of Regents, is what we call an Identity and Access Management Lifecycle Committee. And in that committee, we have representatives from our registrar's office, from our human resources group, from our controller's office, from some of the tools or the leaders of some of the units that represent some of the tools that we use to vet identity or to use as identity credentials. Our UCard office, for example, they're part of this. What we are trying to get to is an institutional agreement on when we need to pay attention to certain identities and provision certain services to those identities. When does a student become a student? When are they no longer a student? So that we can follow with the appropriate mechanisms to provision or deprovision services. Same thing with HR. What action and reason codes from our HR management system, which is the source data for us, what triggers some access or deprovisioning or provisioning on the backside? Is it when a person comes into the institution, when they change roles? How do we assess whether or not they should have the same access credentials when they change job responsibilities? All of those things are items that we talk about in our Identity and Access Management Lifecycle Steering Committee. And so we have the right folks there. They're understanding that this is a highly complex problem, which is part of the change management process, right? And they are creatively making progress on solutions that can help the institution reduce its risk and improve service quality at the same time.
Oh, I really like that. I really like that a lot. And I'm going to try to build it into my next question. I personally have two questions left. You've had a couple of comments and one question come in through the chat window. I'm going to try to hijack them all into two more questions. But I do want to encourage participants to continue to ask questions because I'll just park mine and we'll get right to yours. So I'm going to try to adopt or integrate Michael Geddes' question in the chat function. And for those of you who aren't multitasking too intensely, Michael was a dear friend of Frank Rui that Bernie had mentioned earlier. So my question has to do with, so one way that I have described getting IAM right is that if you get it right, you provide transactional coherence, transactional friendliness, and even transactional warmth across multiple administrative domains within an institution. Right, so if a faculty member hits the grants management system, it makes sense to him or her, right? Because I am who I am, I have these rights and responsibilities. And then when I go to HR payroll or the course management system, that all makes sense, right? Based on who I know myself to be, right? If you get it right, you get that feeling day to day as people hit your various systems. One of the things that the community has done at Internet 2 is build in common, which is an infrastructure to enable many academic disciplines, as Michael has called out in his question, many different academic disciplines to try to extend that transactional coherence, friendliness, and warmth outside of the boundaries of your institution. And I want to ask you both, how is it that you're able to leverage in common in either an administrative or academic support context to help faculty, students, grad students, postdocs, and administrators get their work done by taking the techniques of identity and access management locally and extending them globally via in common? Bernie, do you have anything that comes to top of mind about how it is we're leveraging these infrastructures?
I don't have specifics, Kevin, but what I do know is that our identity management team, which is doing a wonderful job, really relies on in common in the community, because there are use cases, use examples that are directly translated to the work that we have to do here, and solutions that the community has arrived at that are repurposable to the use cases that we have within our institutions. And so the in common framework is one that is leveraged by this institution and by that group, and considered to be a very valuable source of information and a community in which we can both learn, but also get experiences and a better understanding of how other people have solved these problems in their institutions.
Awesome, thanks. Dave, what about you?
Well, I'm going to start by emphasizing the community part of In Common. I was blown away the more I got involved with In Common and exactly what the In Common community meant. There's the glossy brochure definition of community. That's not what In Common is. In Common is a genuine, enthusiastic, committed, expert, inclusive, let's help each other type community. And that's the most powerful type of resource that there is for what we're doing. Then come the added on benefits of what In Common can do on the tech side and the access. It's often the small examples that have a really big impact to people. Whether it's NIH or Hattie Trust from the library, that was huge. So it's all of that in one package. And if In Common Basecamp was able to educate me on what I needed to know, then there's hope for everybody.
Last time I'm going to have you on a panel. You're funnier than me. So I just have one more question for you both before maybe we turn it over to Netta. So soon we'll get back to this, but when we've been able to host events traditionally face-to-face, like Basecamp, like camp, like A Camp, and our training events as well. One of the stories that happens at lunchtime or dinner time or something, somebody will invariably, as the week goes on and they get more comfortable, they'll share something that they think is really a distinguishing feature of how they get IAM done. Sometimes it's technology, but as you both indicated, the technology is actually a very small percentage of getting it right. It's like, by my measure, it's like 10%. The rest of it's people and process and relationship and all that. Is there a particular aspect of the way you and your institutions are doing identity that you're exceptionally proud of and that you think might be distinguishing? And I want to fully recognize that it might not be distinguishing, right? There could be 5 attendees out of 100 that say, yeah, we do that too, and that's perfectly fine. I'm just curious, is there something that you lead with when you have those campus conversations or when you talk to your in-laws about it that you really like about how you're doing IAM? Dave?
Well, I'd probably lie to my in-laws, so I'll skip that one. I'm going to use this as an unashamed plug. The thing that works best for us is that we're awesome and we have fun doing it, and we have vacancies. If you're interested, get hold of me.
Shameless. I love it. Bernie.
Same thing. No.
You guys are awfully close. I didn't even think about how close Minnesota and Iowa are, like in terms of longitude and latitude.
The difference is I've got snow on the ground and Dave doesn't, right?
You give them wind, I think. But.
Right. The things that I'm really proud about is that we've set course on an initiative that we're making progress on, despite the disruption that we've had in the last 2 years. We've had to reorder the things that we've been working on, but we are making progress. And at the same time, I feel that the change management mechanisms are in place and working. You know, as I mentioned, our Board of Regents, they ask me, why do people have access to services when they are no longer employed at the institution, right? These are very limited, but they ask me that question. And so I have the air cover from that perspective. And one by one, our senior leadership understands that we have to change some of our practices and that we have to get really crisp about the way in which we provide access management. And to do that well, you have to manage your identities, right? And so we've opened up this large conversation that gets to happen in different places for people to understand. Because when we begin to implement some of these measures that, you know, everybody in our institutions are intolerant of the inconvenient, right? And this is change, and change is inconvenient. And so that has to be managed really, really well. But I'm really proud of both the technical and the socialization that we're doing to lead us to the spot that I told people 2 years ago it was going to take us 3 to 5 years to get to.
Well, Bernie, Dave, it's about time to wrap up. I want to take this opportunity to thank you both for your historical and your Wednesday, March 23rd support for the identity and access management community in U.S. higher education and beyond. We had attendees from UK, Netherlands, and Canada today as well. So just really grateful for your support. It kind of builds on what Dave was saying about community. We really do take that seriously, and we are also delighted and energized by the sense of community that's been created by all of us. And want to also take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank Dave for his current service on the In-Common Steering Committee. And we had many other volunteers on our committees and working groups in attendance in the webinar today. So for those of you in attendance who are meeting with us many times bi-monthly to get it right, just thank you all for your volunteerism and passion. It makes my job really fun to do. So Bernie, Dave, thank you so much. Netta, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. I will go ahead and share my screen here. We have a couple of things to wrap up, but just echoing what Kevin said, really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today for IAM Online. And a really, really huge thank you again to Dave and Bernie for all of your insights and your path toward IAM. It's really helpful for our community to hear from these experiences. So I will share my screen. So wrapping up, and yes, if you have thanks, you can go ahead and throw those in the chat there if you would like to thank Bernie and Dave. But just before we wrap up and move about our Wednesday, I just have a couple of quick things and happenings that are going on with In-Common Inter 2 that I want to make sure that everyone is aware of. So as you are closing out of this webinar, we do have a quick Zoom survey. If you could please take that, it would be really, really great just to get like a temperature check on whether this information is valuable to you as our community. So if you can fill that out and just take a minute to complete those questions, we would really appreciate it. Our next IAM Online will be Wednesday, April 20th, focused around our collaboration success program, which I'm going to touch on in just a second here. And then we're always looking for ideas. Again, we're kicking off this great panel for 2022, but we are looking for other ideas, general feedback about our webinars, what information would be helpful for us to explore that would help you. So if you have questions, ideas, feedback, I'm here. Reach out to me. I would love to hear from you, talk with you, promise I'm friendly, and we can have a conversation. So just let me know and reach out. I would really love to hear from all of you. All right, so back to the Collaboration Success Program really quick. So getting IAM done faster, better together. That is what it's all about. So if you're an organization that is going through some challenges, or trying to just really in general figure out your identity and access management journey, we are here to support you. We have a wonderful collaboration success program that's really a cohort of institutions coming together to really get some hands-on guidance and expertise from those who are knowledgeable in identity and access management. So if you think that would be of interest to you, even if you don't know a lot about it or you're just kind of waffling thinking about it, we do have our expression of interest open. And just so you know, all of these slides will be shared afterward as well. So you don't have to worry about scrambling and writing down any links, although I know some of them are being posted in the chat as well. So if you think that you might want some help this upcoming year, just kind of getting started or moving through identity and access management, again, we've got your back. Please reach out and connect with us and we can tell you more about CSP. Also, which I think Dave mentioned, was Basecamp. It is upon us. It is coming up. We're really excited. June 6th through 10th. Basecamp is just basically kind of that. It's the basics on campus architecture and middleware planning. We have a full lineup for you for the week in terms of presentations, opportunities to connect with other people in this space and just kind of make some new friends and learn a lot. So whether you've been to Basecamp before and would love a refresher, or you're kind of new to this area and you're like, let me just hear like what's going on. Let me get my head around some of the basic concepts. Again, we've got you covered. So consider joining Basecamp, and we do have a promo going right now. So if you'd like to bring your team or team up with some of your peers to register, it's buy two, get one free. So hope to see you all at Basecamp. And again, reach out if you have any questions about that virtual conference. And that's why I'll emphasize it's virtual, so very easy and accessible to get to. Training. So with our specific software, if you've ever been interested in like, hey, let me get the down low and train myself on Shibboleth or Midpoint Grouper. We just recently, I think, had one for co-manage, but don't worry, that'll be coming back again later in the year. But if you are interested in any of our trainings and want to sign up for those, that is open as well. And then, of course, you know, I threw a lot at you in terms of resources and learning, and there is a lot to do in this space. But if you're like, hey, I would love additional help as well, just to really get started, we do also have our wonderful catalysts. Our catalysts are industry members who are really knowledgeable about the space, our federation, our trusted access platform, pretty much all things in common. So we have vetted them to really be hands-on with helping people in our community get up and running and solve for various challenges and needs. So if you are interested in working with an industry member around identity and access management, we also can get you in and get you connected to figure out who might be the best catalyst to work with as you're working through your challenges. And that's really what I have for today. So again, thank you all. This is a wonderful webinar. Hope to see you all next month. And I hope the rest of your Wednesday is lovely. So cheers. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Netta, Susan.
Thank
Carly.
you.